Who is Rick's real final boss, his greatest enemy? Got a favourite Rick and Morty villain ever wondered who actually counts as Rick's final boss? If this was a video game and not an extended mental breakdown? Well, if you love Rick Sanchez for some reason, buckle up, because by the end of this video we are going to crown one ultimate nemesis, and it is probably not the name you're yelling at your screen right now. Is it Evil Morty, the little yellow shirt fascist killer of dreams who literally tried to delete Rick from the multiverse? Is it Rick Prime, the guy who walked into a garage one day and speed ran Rick's tragic backstory in under 30 seconds? Is it the Council of Ricks, the Citadel god? Jerry, some cosmic eldritch thing? Or is Rick's greatest enemy just Rick with fewer hangovers and slightly better coping skills? People argue about this like it's a sports debate show. Evil Morty is the big bad. No, Rick Prime killed his family. Actually, the system is the villain. Cool takes. Cute even. But we're going to treat this like a full-on true crime breakdown. By the time we're done, we'll have a most wanted board for Rick's enemies with red string everywhere and one face in the center circled 3 times in highlighter. And we're not picking that face on vibes. We're going to use fake serious criteria like a broken podcast bro. Emotional damage, body count, multiversal disruption, how many days Rick actually loses control, how illegal their whole existence would be if the Time Cops had a functioning HR department. Just to give you an idea of how petty I'm willing to get, we're literally going to compare who hurts Rick more per episode. Because look at this guy's track record. He kills gods on the weekend. He topples the Galactic Federation before breakfast. He survives the Citadel once as a prisoner, and once as the accidental architect of its political collapse. He turns entire governments into a speed bump on the way to more booze. Every time a huge external threat shows up, Rick eventually wins. Sometimes it takes a war. Sometimes it takes a suicide machine and a country song, but he wins. And yet, when the portal gun powers down, when the spaceship parks in the garage and Morty goes to bed, one enemy keeps winning. Rick can beat a council of himself, but can't beat the thing that makes him crawl back to that same garage every single night. I'm the smartest man in the universe, Morty. He says that like it's a flex. But if he's so smart, why does he keep losing to the exact same type of enemy over and over? Why does every big bad either look like him, think like him, or live rent-free in his brain? If you ask me, that sounds less like a rivalry and more like a diagnosis. So here's the deal. We're going to open a case file on each suspect, Evil Morty, Rick Prime, the Council, and Citadel, and, yeah, Rick's own brain chemistry. We'll pull evidence from across the show, cross-examine every crime against Rick, and at the end I'm delivering a verdict that might change how you watch the entire series, and I don't know, I'm kind of here for it. What even counts as Rick's greatest enemy? Okay, before we start throwing hands on Rick's behalf, we need ground rules. Because greatest enemy can't just mean who punched Rick the hardest, or we'd be here arguing about a random space bug that got a lucky crit. We're going to be fake scientific about this. Like, if Rick can quantify love with a potion and accidentally commit mass body horror, we can quantify his haters. So when I say greatest enemy, I'm talking about a combo. Physical threat, intellectual rivalry, emotional vulnerability, and how much they screw with his core worldview. Not just who can shoot him, but who can actually break him. To keep it clean, we're scoring every contender in 4 categories. First, direct harm to Rick's life and family, who actually ruins his days, his home, his bloodline. Rick Prime murdering Diane and their Beth. That's a hell of a hit. Second, long-term psychological impact. Who keeps living in Rick's head rent-free, years and multiverses later? Third, ability to challenge his intellect or ideology. Who makes smartest man in the universe look like a bad meme? Evil Morty literally targets the central finite curve, the firewall Rick's built so they're always the smartest guys around. That's not just a crime against Rick, that's a crime against his entire belief system. And fourth, how much they actually change the universe or status quo. Are we talking one bad afternoon or a full rewrite of reality? Under that system, we've got 4 main suspects. Evil Morty, the long game mastermind who looks at the Rick-centric multiverse and says, yeah, I'm good, delete. Rick Prime, the personal nemesis who doesn't just hurt Rick, he forges him. The Council and Citadel of Ricks, an entire institution built in Rick's image that still decides he's too illegal to live. And finally, Rick versus Rick, his own self-destructive tendencies, the drinking, the depression, the constant urge to blow up anything that feels like attachment, Everybody else? Jerry is not in this bracket, I'm sorry, but annoying your son-in-law is not on the same level as multiversal fascism, random aliens of the week, that one guy who just wanted his limited edition sauce, the president with hurt feelings. Cute, but they're playing T-ball while these four are speed-running cosmic war crimes. If you ask me, they're barely mini-bosses. Here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the obvious external enemies, the ones who point guns, drop bombs, and make Rick actually sweat on screen. Then we escalate to the big systemic stuff. The Council, the Citadel, the whole Rick industrial complex turning on its creator. And at the very end, when you're feeling all smart and analytical, we're going to yank the portal gun batteries and ask if his worst enemy has been sitting in his own skull the whole time. And don't worry, this is staying fun and fast. We're talking episode receipts, dark jokes, faux educational breakdowns, the whole thing. But believe it or not, the emotional side of Rick, the guy who still watches a fake memory of Diane on loop, is going to matter way more than you probably expect. So buckle up, because the next segment is where the body count starts climbing and the greatest enemy scoreboard actually goes live. Why Jerry, the Federation, and random gods don't make the cut. So before we crown Rick's final boss, we've got to clear out the warm-up mobs. You know, the guys the game throws at you so you feel powerful before it ruins your life. And believe it or not, a lot of people stop at Jerry, the Galactic Federation, or some random god of farts and forget those are basically Rick's tutorial levels. Let's do a quick preliminary hearing. Court is now in session. The people versus everyone who thinks they can take Rick. First witness, Jerry Smith. On paper, Jerry looks like Rick's opposite. He's insecure, conventional, allergic to science, and his biggest crime is existing in Rick's eyeline. Rick roasts him constantly, sabotages his marriage, and turns every family dinner into a public execution. But is Jerry actually a threat? Not really. Jerry never endangers Rick's power, he just annoys him. In the whirly-durly conspiracy, Jerry technically gets a shot at Rick when they're on the immortality ride, and what does he do? He wimps out, gets manipulated, and ends up crying in a space casino. That's not a nemesis, that's emotional target practice. Jerry doesn't crack Rick's worldview, he props it up. Every time Jerry fails, it tells Rick, yep, I'm the smartest guy in the room, and this doofus is lucky I even exist. If you ask me, Jerry's entire sentence in the enemy court is accessory to Rick's ego. Next on the stand, the Galactic Federation. These guys look legit. Space cops, giant prison, full-on totalitarian bureaucracy. They actually arrest Rick, lock him up and throw away the key for like 10 minutes of screen time. In the Rickshank Rickdemption, Rick turns his own interrogation into a jailbreak, hacks their mainframe, tanks their currency, and collapses the entire government from a chair. That's not a long war, that's a speed run. Any enemy you can topple in one season premiere is not your greatest existential threat. It's a side quest. The Federation is dangerous for regular people, sure, but for Rick it's just a really illegal puzzle room he solves between McNugget sauce cravings. The show is basically screaming at you, institutions can't hold this man, not when he's bored, drunk and has 5 backup plans in his liver. What about gods? Cosmic entities? Beings beyond mortal comprehension? Rick treats them like customer service reps. In Something Rick This Way Comes, he out-hustles the literal devil with a better business model and a montage. In A Wrinkle in Time and Get Swifty, reality and giant heads show up acting like omnipotent judges, and Rick just sciences his way through their tests, like it's a pop quiz he forgot to study for but still aces. The show keeps telling you, raw power, status, divine titles, all of that is background noise. Rick kills gods, humiliates them, or turns them into memes. That's not a real enemy, that's brand management. So where does that leave us? Jerry, the Federation, the gods, all the monsters of the week. They're low-level mobs. Fun, occasionally scary, but ultimately designed to make Rick look strong. They don't expose what he can't fix with a portal gun, a death ray or a sarcastic rant. The real greatest enemy is going to go after the one place Rick can't just science away, the stuff rotting behind his eyes. And yeah, that's where the body count and the emotional damage both start getting a hell of a lot higher. Buckle up. Defining the battlefield. Rick's ego, family, and the central finite curve. So if Rick's real weak spot is the stuff rotting behind his eyes, what does an enemy actually have to attack? His fists? His portal gun? Cute. But no. To hurt Rick, you have to go after his custom-built universe and the tiny handful of people he pretends he doesn't care about. Let's start with the big one, the central finite curve. You've probably heard the phrase and gone, yeah, multiverse science noises, and moved on. But buckle up, because this thing is basically Rick's cosmic safe space. In simple terms, Rick's got together and built a giant multiversal firewall that slices reality into two categories. Universes where a Rick is the smartest thing around, and everything else that might make him feel small. Only the Rick-safe slice is allowed in. Everything beyond that, bricked off like your ex's Netflix profile. That means every portal gun you see, every citadel full of Ricks, is operating inside a curated bubble where Rick is, by design, unbeatable. He didn't just want to be smart, he wanted the laws of existence to come pre-installed with Rick as top dog as a setting. Any enemy who messes with that system isn't just attacking his tech, they're committing a hate crime against his ego. You're not saying you lost the game, you're saying the game was rigged and you still suck, which is a hell of a lot worse if you ask me. But the multiverse god complex is only half the battlefield. The other half is way smaller and way messier, Diane and Beth. Rick Prime killing Rick C-137's wife and daughter isn't just backstory, it's the original crime scene. That one moment turns Rick from a guy who makes illegal gadgets for fun into a walking revenge project. His alcoholism, his depression, the way he treats Morty like both a tool and a shield, those aren't random character quirks. That's a man who lost everything and decided the only way to never feel that again is to control literally every variable around him, including which realities are allowed to exist. Episodes like Auto-Erotic Assimilation rip the mask off. Rick gets dumped by a hive mind, goes home, gets blackout drunk, and casually builds a suicide machine while the galaxy's greatest grandpa montage plays in the background. That's not a gag, that's a guy ready to clock out. The Wedding Squanchers does the same thing. The family is shattered, Bird Person is dead. Rick turns himself into the Galactic Federation, and you watch him basically choose prison over feeling anything. The show keeps turning his pain into a recurring character, so any greatest enemy, worth the title, has to hit both fronts. They've got to challenge the Rick-safe multiverse, central finite curve, citadel, council, all of it, and they've got to stab straight into the family trauma and self-hatred underneath. And believe it or not, our top contenders all manage that in completely different ways. One tears down his multiversal firewall, one embodies his original loss, and one might be the part of Rick he can't ever escape. We're going to see who actually lands the deepest cut. The Council of Ricks. When your own face puts you in handcuffs. So if the central finite curve is Rick's giant cosmic firewall, what happens when the firewall grows a face and starts arresting you? Buckle up, because now Rick's enemy is Rick, or like 1,000 of him in matching robes. Close Rick Counters of the Rick kind is our first real tour of the Citadel, a whole floating city built by Ricks for Ricks to manage Rick-based crimes. You've got a council of Ricks, a Rick police force, Rick bureaucracy, and probably an illegal amount of Rick ego per cubic inch. The idea is simple. Ricks are being hunted across the multiverse, so they band together in a quasi-governmental Rick NATO to protect themselves from outside threats. On paper, that's self-defense. In practice, it's a homeowners association with portal guns, and then they do the most Rick thing possible. They frame the one Rick who refuses to play ball. Our Rick, C-137, gets dragged in as the prime suspect for murdering alternate Ricks and kidnapping alternate Mortys. The council literally walks into his garage, slaps multiversal handcuffs on him, and ships him off for interrogation. The system he helped create to avoid being hunted. It's now the thing hunting him. That's a hell of a backfire if you ask me. Just to give you an idea of how twisted that is, Rick's whole survival strategy is stay uncatchable. No governments, no bosses, no one to answer to. Then suddenly he's in a glass prison cube, surrounded by versions of himself lecturing him about rules and procedure. It's self-policing turned up to 11. The council takes Rick's paranoia about being targeted and turns it into a literal institution that targets him whenever he steps outside the party line. Metaphorically, the council is Rick's worst nightmare. Conformity with his own face. These guys are willing to trade individuality for safety, to standardize being a Rick into a job description. They've got ID badges, they've got committees, they've probably got HR, that clashes directly with C-137's whole brand of anarchic, Nothing matters, do whatever anti-authority chaos. When your greatest crime in their eyes is not filling out the multiversal paperwork, you know something's broken. But are they actually his greatest enemy? Power-wise, they can absolutely lock him up and outmaneuver him for a bit. He doesn't portal gun his way out instantly. He has to play along, hack their systems, and ride the wave of evil Rick's plot to flip the table. And in the Rickshank Rickdemption, he goes even further and outright destroys the council, collapses their government, and hijacks their databases like it's a Tuesday. They're a big boss fight, but not the final boss. So on the scorecard, the council ranks crazy high on systemic threat and ideological betrayal, but pretty low on long-term impact. Rick overthrows them, steals their toys, and walks away. Except that giant citadel infrastructure they built, it doesn't stay empty. Someone way scarier is going to move in and use their Rick-shaped cage for something much darker. The Citadel, Rick's empire turned against him. That Rick-shaped cage doesn't just become a ghost town, it becomes the Citadel. And the wild part, it's not really Rick's kingdom, it's his haunted house. You look at it once and go, oh, cool, a whole city of Ricks. And then you look closer and realize it's basically North Korea with portal guns. Because the Citadel isn't just the council in a boardroom. It's factories, schools, cop shows, elections, wage labor, all of it built around one idea. Ricks are special, and Mortys are bubble wrap, disposable padding. You've got rich Ricks in suits, poor Ricks on assembly lines, Mortys crammed into classrooms and sweatshops, and an entire propaganda machine telling everyone this is totally fine. Which, if you ask me, is a hell of a cell phone for a guy who keeps screaming about freedom. The Ricklantis mix-up is where the mask really comes off. Remember that fake-out where you think you're going on an underwater adventure, and the episode just hard cuts to Citadel life? Pattern interrupt. Buckle up, you're in a Rick dystopia now. You get worker Rick on the pickle line, cop Rick brutalizing Mortys, campaign Morty trying to run for office, and a school full of kids who have accepted that being a Morty means you're legally a second-class organism. Just to give you an idea of how broken it is, most of the Ricks we see aren't mad scientists. They're middle managers and mall cops. So the Citadel quietly nukes Rick's whole fantasy about Ricks being untouchable rebels. Most of them aren't outsmarting the system. They are the system. They clock in. They get exploited. They die in stupid, preventable ways. It's like Rick invented a multiversal HOA where every rule is written by a Rick, and every Rick still hates their life. And for Rick C-137, that's humiliating. This is a giant machine wearing his face that he doesn't control, doesn't respect, and can't completely destroy without wiping out thousands of versions of himself and Morty. He's technically the original rebel Rick, but the Citadel keeps spitting out Ricks and Mortys who look at his whole nihilist alcoholic lone wolf thing and go, yeah, no thanks. The ultimate rejection is evil Morty. A Morty who uses the Citadel's elections, cops, and cable news to climb the ladder, slaughter his way to the top, and then aim his rage at the entire Rick-centric multiverse. That's the irony. Rick built this cluster of Ricks to avoid outside enemies. Safety in numbers, right? Instead, he created an enemy factory. An ecosystem where disillusioned Ricks, abused Mortys, and ambitious sociopaths incubate until one of them decides to tear the whole curve down. The Citadel doesn't shatter Rick C-137's bones, but it absolutely supercharges the people who will try. So on the greatest enemy scoreboard, the Citadel sits in that mid-tier slot. Not the final boss, but the arena where the final bosses spawn. And the scariest one to walk out of that arena? Yeah, we're going to have to talk about Evil Morty. Evil Morty enters, the first enemy who aims above. Rick Evil Morty walks out of that arena like, cool Citadel you got here. Shame if someone weaponized it. You remember his first episode, right? Little Morty with the eye patch looking like the most abused sidekick in the multiverse. Got a cruel Rick, a torture chair, dead Ricks everywhere. You feel bad for him. You're supposed to. That's the con. Because the twist is brutal. That Morty isn't the victim, he's the one driving the whole crime. He's literally puppeteering a Rick, framing our Rick for illegal multi-dimensional murder, and using the council's paranoia to wipe out anyone who might see through him. That's not sad Morty. That's, I just staged a false flag Rick genocide Morty. And if you ask me, that's a hell of a promotion from grandson with anxiety. Fast forward to the Ricklantis mix-up. You think you're watching a goofy Citadel anthology. Factory Morty, Cop Rick, Campaign Morty. It's basically Rick City stories. Then Campaign Morty wins, executes his political enemies, and rips off the eye patch. Evil Morty just stole an election, took over the Citadel, and turned the entire Rick government into his personal speedrun category. Democracy any percent. But all of that is just foreplay for Rick Mirai Jack. This is where we finally see the central finite curve, the giant multiversal babygate Rick's built to wall off reality into a safe zone where they are, by design, the smartest things that can exist. No god above, no mind beyond. Just an infinite Rick-centric prison with Mortys pre-installed as emotional shock absorbers. Believe it or not, that's the system Evil Morty's actually trying to kill. He doesn't want to beat Rick C-137 in a chess match. He wants to flip the board, melt the pieces, and move to a universe where Rick is just some guy. His plan is insanely long-term. Infiltrate the Council, hijack the Citadel, use its resources to crack the curve, and then detonate the whole firewall so he can escape into a multiverse where Ricks aren't automatically top of the food chain. He's not playing Rick's game better, he's deleting the game files. That makes him Rick's first truly ideological enemy. He rejects the entire premise that Mortys are born to suffer, so Ricks can feel deep and complicated. To Evil Morty, the Rick-dominated multiverse is an abusive relationship baked into physics, and the only ethical move is to blow a hole in the wall big enough to crawl through. You can see why Rick hates this guy. It's not just a threat to his body, it's a direct attack on his godlike self-image. And here's the part that really stings. Evil Morty wins. He survives, executes the plan, and actually leaves the central finite curve. Rick doesn't outsmart him, doesn't drag him back, doesn't even get closure. The portal gun turns off, the music swells, and Evil Morty walks into a universe where Rick might not matter at all. That unresolved, still out there enemy? Yeah, that's going to keep Rick up at night way longer than any dead council ever could, and it sets the bar brutally high for the one guy who manages to hurt Rick even more, the Rick who started it all. Evil Morty versus Rick's ego. When being the smartest stops mattering so. When Evil Morty walks through that golden portal and leaves Rick behind, that's not just a cool wallpaper shot. That's Rick literally stuck in the central finite curve in his little Rick-approved aquarium, while Evil Morty steps into an ocean where being the smartest man in the universe doesn't even mean anything. You can almost hear the universe saying, "Congrats Rick, you built a prison and accidentally made yourself warden and inmate." Because that's the real crime here. The central finite curve isn't a fun sci-fi toy, it's a narcissistic firewall. It cuts off every universe where Rick isn't the top dog. Evil Morty looks at that and goes, yeah, this is illegal levels of ego. He doesn't frame it as, Rick hurt me, I want revenge. He frames it as, Rick's turned the multiverse into a cult where everything orbits one drunk grandpa. His plan is way bigger than a personal sentence against one Rick. It's systemic liberation. He's trying to jailbreak reality from Rick's fanfic, and the way he does it, he doesn't just beat a Rick, he beats Rickness as an institution. First the Council of Ricks, then the Citadel, both built on the assumption that no one understands Ricks better than Ricks. Evil Morty goes, cool, I'll use that predictability against you. He rigs elections, puppets a goofy Morty president arc, and turns their own bureaucracy into a bomb. Just to give you an idea of how disrespectful that is, it's like speedrunning a dictatorship any percent and then uninstalling the game. Notice he almost never goes for Rick C-137 directly. That's the part that really stings. Rick loves to believe he's the main character of every conflict. The target, the rival, the special one. Evil Morty looks at him and basically says, you're not special, you're a symptom. He doesn't hate our Rick. He hates what Ricks did to reality. And if you ask me, that's a hell of an emotional gut punch. Imagine being so obsessed with yourself that when the big bad finally wins, you're not even his final boss. You're background radiation. And yet, for some reason, you kind of see why Evil Morty's over it. He's the rare character who's like, I'm not going to spend my days chasing Rick around the multiverse for closure. He just leaves. No monologue, no duel, no see you in season 10. He walks into a place where Rick's trauma, Rick's genius, Rick's crimes, all that central finite curve lore probably doesn't matter at all anymore. Believe it or not, that might be the one outcome Rick can't outscience. So is Evil Morty Rick's greatest enemy? Ideologically and structurally, he's top tier. He blows a hole in Rick's god complex and permanently nerfs his universe-scale power. But does he stab Rick right in that oldest, rawest wound? Not quite. For that, you need the one Rick who didn't just break Rick's toys but broke his life. And yeah, that's where Rick Prime walks in. Legal brief. What counts as winning against Rick? So before we throw Rick Prime and the rest of these multiversal gremlins into the ring, we kind of need a rulebook. What even counts as beating Rick? Is it pinning him to the floor for like 30 seconds? Or is it something way uglier, like living rent-free in his brain for the rest of his illegal little life? Let's lay down a dumb but useful legal standard. Under the totally made-up case of Multiverse vs. Sanchez, you don't get credit for a win just because you knocked Rick out in one episode. That's a traffic ticket. To actually score a conviction, you have to do one of three things: permanently change his behavior, break one of his core systems, or leave a wound the show keeps reopening like it's trying to get infected on purpose. Short-term wins are everywhere. The Galactic Federation arrests him, chains him up, and brags about it. The President corners him in the White House. Hell, even random parasites and mind control worms get him on his knees sometimes. Those are like, "Congratulations, you captured a rabid raccoon for 48 hours" moments. Impressive. Sure. Long term, Rick escapes, kills everyone, and is back at the garage like it was a spa day. Long-term victories look very different. Evil Morty doesn't just outsmart Rick in one room, he escapes the central finite curve entirely. That's not a punch, that's burning down the boxing ring. Rick Prime doesn't just beat Rick in a fight, he blows up Diane and Beth and rewrites Rick's entire life trajectory. That's a life sentence of trauma, if you ask me. From a narrative perspective, Rick's greatest enemy isn't the guy with the flashiest laser, or the biggest body count in a finale. It's whoever the story keeps orbiting around across seasons. Think of it like true crime. You don't call someone a criminal mastermind because of one bad night. You look at the pattern. Who keeps showing up? Who keeps escalating? Who keeps forcing Rick to change his tools, his rules, or his personality just to cope? If Rick's life were a court case, we're not just asking who threw the most punches. We're asking who's got the thickest case file, who's racked up consistent, meaningful harm, emotional, ideological, structural. Evil Morty files motions against Rick's whole belief system. The Citadel and the Council of Ricks are like an institutional class action lawsuit against Rick Ness itself. Believe it or not, I don't know, I'm kind of here for it. Anyway, buckle up, because by that standard we're about to move from the high-level ideological enemies to the raw, personal trauma case. The one defendant who doesn't just attack Rick's ego or his empire, but the origin story itself. Rick Prime, the man who literally blew up the family and turned Rick into the crime scene we know today. The origin of all Rick's nightmares. So, who is Rick Prime, really? Just another variant with better hair? Or the guy who speedran Rick's life into a tragedy pilot? Because once you walk through his origin, you realize every crime, every bottle, every illegal gadget, all of it is basically Exhibit B in the case of Rick Prime versus Rick's soul. Let's rewind to the Rick Mirai Jack flashbacks. We see Prime roll up like a multiversal tech bro, casually offering portal gun blueprints to a younger, still mostly domestic Rick. This Rick has Diane, has a little Beth, has a shot at being a normal, emotionally available dad who only ruins Thanksgivings, not timelines. Prime's pitch is simple. Ditch the family life, come be a god with me. And C-137 actually says no. Wild, right? Cut to the garage. Diane and Beth are hanging out, doing the most wholesome thing you can do in this universe. Exist before character development. A bomb portal opens, drops in, and the whole place goes up. No warning, no speech, no "I am your greatest enemy" monologue. Just an explosion that erases an entire future in about 3 seconds of screen time. That one moment is the big bang of Rick's entire personality, and this is the key part. That scene isn't just a sad backstory you slap on a Funko Pop. It's the foundational trauma that turns Rick from smart guy with a family into walking war crime with a catchphrase. The alcoholism, self-medication, the depression and suicide attempts, direct fallout, the endless multiversal wandering, hopping from reality to reality like a cosmic couch surfer. That's a years-long manhunt for Rick Prime disguised as science adventures. Season 6 doubles down. We find out Rick literally programs his house, his AI, his entire routine around the hunt. He builds tech to track Prime across universes, torches countless timelines, and spends decades turning the multiverse into his personal cold case board. Just to give you an idea of how obsessive that is, imagine someone so committed to revenge they basically speedrun becoming the most wanted being in existence. For one guy. That obsession indirectly drops him into the Smith family we know. He doesn't land there because of love. He lands there because this Beth kind of fits the shape of the Beth he lost. And this reality is convenient cover while he keeps chasing Prime. It's not adoption, it's witness protection with extra trauma. Now compare that to Evil Morty. Evil Morty attacks Rick's ideology, the central finite curve, the whole Ricks are the smartest religion. But Rick Prime, he attacks the heart. He's the only enemy who permanently rewrites Rick's life, steals the wife and child and replaces them with a lifetime sentence of grief, booze and body counts. On the personal harm and psychological damage axes, Rick Prime is absolutely the leading contender for greatest enemy, if you ask me. But is he actually number one? Or is the worst enemy the broken, self-destructive Rick that event created? Yeah, buckle up because that's where we're going next. Rick versus Rick Prime, revenge, obsession, and hollow victory. So let's talk about Rick's longest-running side quest. Hate stalking Rick Prime like it's his full-time job, and everyone else is unpaid emotional labour. From the moment we see that origin flashback with Diane and little Beth, Rick basically writes himself a lifetime sentence of revenge. Every portal, every tracker, every late night in the garage, it's not science for fun, it's science for murder, and you see the collateral damage immediately. Morty thinks he's signing up for wacky adventures. Instead, he's bait in a multiversal manhunt. Family dinner? Skipped. School? Who cares? Therapy? Illegal in Rick's brain. Anytime Rick gets a lead on Prime, he ditches the family, ghosts his responsibilities, and drags Morty into increasingly lethal situations. Just to give you an idea of how warped this is, Rick will prioritize chasing one guy over literally keeping his grandson's body count under triple digits. Season after season, we get these almost encounters. The decoy episode Fake Out, the mysterious tracking systems buried under the garage, that whole stretch in Season 6 where Rick quietly swaps out fun adventures for Prime hunting side ops. Morty's like, "Are we bonding?" And Rick's like, "No, idiot, you're a human shield with puberty." Every time Rick gets close, Prime slips away, outsmarts him, or just refuses to play by the same obsessive rules. Is a hell of a troll. And even when Rick wins a round, it feels wrong. He'll blow up a base, kill some Ricks, torture a lead, and you expect him to feel better, right? Nope. He's more hollow, more drunk, more checked out. The guy is technically racking up W's in the revenge column, but emotionally he's going 0 for 100. It's like watching someone speedrun their own depression. Fast forward to their big showdown. Rick finally corners Rick Prime, and this should be the moment. The crime of Diane and Beth's murder gets its verdict. The sentence is death. We should be cheering, or at least feeling that boss-defeated dopamine. Instead, it plays like a really sad paperwork montage. Prime dies, and Rick doesn't level up, he just kind of stays Rick. No epiphany, no healing, just a slightly bloodier version of the same guy who walked in. Believe it or not, that emptiness is the point. If Rick Prime were truly the greatest enemy, killing him should function like a narrative reset button. But after the body hits the floor, Rick is still broken, still alcoholic, still sabotaging Morty, still terrified of being vulnerable. Prime is the origin of the wound, sure, but he isn't the wound. The infection took over a long time ago, and that's our big clue. Rick Prime is the obvious final boss, the guy you're going to put on the thumbnail, but when Rick finally pulls the trigger and nothing inside him changes, that screams that his real enemy isn't something he can shoot, portal, or outsmart. So if it's not Prime, who is it? And what happens when that enemy fights back? Sidebar. Rick as grandfather, weapon, and walking red flag. You stop looking at the sniper on the roof and start looking at the hostages. Because Rick's greatest enemy has a booster seat and algebra homework. Buckle up. We need a quick sidebar into the world's most illegal childcare arrangement. Rick as grandpa, weapon, and walking red flag. Take Rick and Morty's whole dynamic. Rick is constantly yanking Morty out of class, out of reality, out of basic OSHA compliance. He drags this kid into Cronenberg apocalypses, sex robot baby custody battles, and Let's bury our own corpses in the backyard character building exercises. You call it trauma, Rick calls it Tuesday. He verbally shreds Morty non-stop. You're like Hitler, but even Hitler cared about Germany. That level of emotional battery. That's abuse that doesn't just hurt in the moment, it rewires Morty's entire sense of self. And then, just when you think Rick's a lost cause, he throws in a genuine hug, or sacrifices himself to the Galactic Federation, or spends literal decades in a fake prison simulation just to keep Morty safe. It's a messy, codependent spiral. Morty needs Rick's approval. Rick needs Morty's proximity. Any therapist watching this is probably drafting a book deal. An enemy's notice. Evil Morty weaponizes that dependency on a cosmic scale. His whole plan in Rick Murray Jack only works because Ricks keep Mortys around as emotional support meat shields. Rick Prime. He knows exactly how much leverage a dead kid has over a surviving grandpa, because he already pulled that trigger once with Diane and Beth. Just to give you an idea of how sharp that knife is, all Prime has to do is exist and Rick's entire life reorients into a revenge speedrun. Now compare that to Summer. Summer's the one who talks back, calls Rick on his crap, and for some reason, keeps outperforming Morty in grandkid intern mode. She negotiates with the devil, leads a Mad Max death cult, and runs a Glorzo resistance. Rick is like, low-key proud. He lets her drive the ship, handle weapons, even take point on missions. Different grandkid, different vulnerability. With Morty, it's guilt and protectiveness. With Summer, it's respect and the terrifying idea that someone else might actually learn his game. And when people go after them, Rick bleeds. The Federation uses the family as leverage. The Citadel literally mass-produces disposable Mortys. Evil Morty's entire platform is, what if we stopped letting Ricks ruin our lives? Which, if you ask me, is a hell of a campaign slogan. Every time Rick's actions endanger the Smiths, Cronenberged Earth, Jerry almost dying in space, Beth questioning her own clone status, you see the crack. He drinks harder, isolates more, spirals into that self-hatred loop he can't science his way out of. Here's the dark joke. Rick is both their bodyguard and their biggest active shooter. He's the security system and the burglar. Half the time, external enemies don't need to attack the Smiths. Rick is already doing their job for them. Kidnapping, bioterror, multiversal war crimes. Most of the villain damage report has his name on it anyway. So any true, greatest enemy can't just be a cool, evil variant with a theme song. They have to intersect with this mess. Either they hurt the family directly like Rick Prime did by nuking his original Beth and Diane, or they exploit the guilt-ridden swamp in Rick's head, like Evil Morty does by saying, hey, maybe the problem is Rick's existing at all. And that's where it gets scary, because once you realize his weak point is attachment, you have to ask, what happens when the enemy isn't trying to kill his family, but convince them to walk away from him? Rick versus himself, alcohol, depression, and the suicide episodes. Because here's the messed up part. Rick doesn't actually need an Evil Morty to pull that off. He's already been quietly doing it to himself. If you ask me, the scariest villain reveal in this whole show isn't a post-credits twist. It's Rick, blackout drunk in his own garage, building a suicide machine in autoerotic assimilation. Remember that sequence? Sad music, the gas, the pictures of unity, Rick slumping in the chair. For once, no joke, no portal gun, no punchline. The show just sits in it, and then his own drunken body sabotages the kill switch and he survives by accident. That's not a failed plan. That's a failed execution of a self-execution. Buckle up, because that wasn't a one-off bad mental health day. After the wedding squanches when he turns himself into the Galactic Federation, the fandom treated it like a big brain gambit. Cool heist move, right? But if you actually watch the scene, it plays like a guy who's so depressed he's basically signing up for life in prison as a vibe. He literally walks away from his family, drops the portal gun, and chooses a concrete box. No Rick Prime, no council, just Rick versus the idea of living with his own choices. And threading through all of that is the alcohol. The burps are a gag, sure, but narratively the bottle is doing more consistent damage than any Federation agent. Rick is almost never sober. The crimes we laughed about earlier, half of them are committed while he's visibly wasted. Flying the ship drunk with Morty on board would be an automatic DUI with child endangerment where we live. In space, it's basically a WMD with a hangover. His sidekick isn't Morty, it's a flask that keeps making everything worse. That's an enemy literally inside his bloodstream. Just to give you an idea of how deep this goes, look at how often he nukes his own happiness. Unity offers him a kind of stability. He sabotages it. Birdperson and Tammy's wedding could have been a rare, wholesome moment. He turns it into a bloodbath and then emotionally implodes. Even when he gets close to a functional family setup in later seasons, he picks chaos, isolation, or some illegal revenge quest over just staying for dinner. No villain has to break into the Smith house. Rick pre-breaks it from the inside. Compare that to the so-called big bads. The Federation, the Council, even Rick Prime and Evil Morty, they get arcs. They show up, do damage, exit stage left. Rick's depression and self-loathing, that's in every season in dozens of episodes. Way more screen time, way more narrative weight. If we're applying our fake legal standard of long-term recurring harm, his own mind is racking up the longest sentence by far. You can shoot Rick Prime, you can outsmart the Citadel, but you can't portal gun away from the thing that's sitting in your skull when the credits roll. And the really messed up question is, what happens when that internal enemy finally meets an external one that knows exactly how to weaponize it? When genius backfires, Rick's brain as both weapon and prison. And that's where Rick's real problem shows up. His worst enemy doesn't need a death ray, it just needs his IQ score. Because when your brain is a multiversal search engine, you don't just see options, you see the punchline to every choice, before you even make it. Rick looks at the infinite multiverse and goes, cool, nothing matters, let's do crimes. That's his whole deal. Infinite timelines, infinite versions of Rick, infinite dead Ricks, dead Mortys, dead everythings. When every possible outcome exists somewhere, your specific outcome feels like a joke. Why care about this Morty when there are backup Mortys? Why care about this Earth when you can Cronenberg it and speedrun to a fresh one? It's a hell of a defense mechanism, and a hell of a way to feel completely empty. Just to give you an idea of how broken this gets, think about the do-over device in the Vat of Acid episode. Morty thinks he's got save states. Rick lets him live out entire relationships, friendships, regrets, then reveals every reset was just Morty hopping to a timeline where another Morty got brutally erased. Rick's genius solves the oops I messed up problem, but it also proves your choices are basically a legal fiction. You feel the guilt, some other guy eats the sentence. Same thing with clones. Rick builds decoy families so advanced they think they're real, then watches them slaughter each other in paranoid clone-on-clone warfare. That's Rick's brain in a bottle, endlessly generating contingencies, then being disgusted by the monsters those contingencies become. He can escape any external prison, sure, but he keeps building new mental ones with better special effects, and then you've got the central finite curve. On paper, biggest flex in sci-fi, Rick literally carves out a section of the multiverse where Ricks are always the smartest thing around. No god above, no alien supermind, just him. But if you ask me, that's not a flex, that's a cage made out of ego. By deleting any real intellectual rival, he basically signs up for solitary confinement with his own thoughts. Evil Morty even calls him on it. That whole plan to punch a hole through the curve? It's not just anti-Rick, it's anti the entire Rick worldview that says, I'm the ceiling. When your only competition is you, every victory just proves you're stuck with the one opponent you can't out-invent. So Rick's brain ends up like a self-aiming gun. Pointed at a Galactic Federation prison, it breaks you out. Pointed at a corrupt citadel, it burns the whole thing down. But pointed at the question, what's the point of any of this? And it never misses. He can't lie to himself, can't pretend the spaghetti isn't people, can't pretend family isn't replaceable. That intelligence keeps firing, and the target is always his own ability to care. And if his mind is already doing that to him on a good day, what happens when someone out there figures out exactly how to pull the trigger harder? Metacase file, comparing evil. Morty, Rick Prime, and Rick's mind. So let's stop hand-wringing and actually do this like a case file. You want to know who Rick's greatest enemy is? Cool. We're building a fake little scorecard because if you ask me, nothing says emotional devastation like turning your trauma into a rubric. 4 axes: personal harm to Rick, psychological impact, ideological challenge, and structural change to the universe. 10 points max each. No curve, No extra credit, just vibes and pain. Start with Evil Morty. On structural change, that kid is a walking multiversal war crime. He doesn't just hit the Citadel, he nukes the central finite curve, the literal firewall Rick's built to guarantee they're always the smartest guys in the room. That's a 10 out of 10 in breaking the system, and probably a 9 in ideological challenge because his whole deal is, what if we stop centering the universe around this one sad old man and his portal gun? But personal harm to Rick C-137 specifically, that's where the score dips. Evil Morty tortures a lot of Ricks, rigs elections, turns Mortys into a living pain battery, but with our Rick he's more like a nasty philosophical Yelp review than a stalker. Call it a 4 in direct personal harm, 6 in psychological impact. Rick's rattled, sure, but he isn't waking up every day replaying Evil Morty's mixtape in his head. Now Rick Prime. Buckle up because this is the part where the meter breaks. Personal harm, he literally murders Diane and young Beth, erases Rick's original family, and shoves C-137 onto a decades-long revenge speedrun. That's a clean 10. Psychological impact? Also a 10. Every bottle, every crime, every nothing matters rant is radioactive fallout from that one illegal portal visit. Structural change though, Rick Prime doesn't reshape the whole multiverse, he just corrupts one Rick so deeply that it feels cosmic. Give him a 6 for structural change, maybe a 7 for ideological challenge, because he's the template that proves Ricks will always choose power and obsession over healing. He's a hell of a supervillain, but he's still one guy. Then we get to the weird one on the board, Rick's own mind. No dramatic pilot episode origin, no evil theme music, just this constant background radiation of self-destruction. Personal harm? It's not a single blast, it's a million paper cuts. Suicide attempts, reckless stunts, letting himself almost die because, over time that stacks to a 9. Psychological impact? That's a 10 easy, because it never clocks out. Ideological challenge? Also a 10, because the part of Rick that hates caring is always prosecuting the part that still does. And structural change? His brain invents the Citadel, the curve, the tech that lets every other enemy even exist. That's at least a 9. So the scorecard's weirdly close. Evil Morty wins biggest cosmic rewrite. Rick Prime wins most traumatic origin crime. But the only enemy that shows up in every season, every universe, every quiet moment in the garage, that one's undefeated. The scary part is what happens if any of the others figure out how to team up with that voice in his head. Pattern interrupt. If Rick went to therapy, and his enemies were in the waiting room, so let's stress test that nightmare idea for a second. The voice in Rick's head teams up with his external villains. What does that even look like? Easy, mandatory multiversal group therapy. Buckle up, we're going to the one place Rick actually fears more than the Galactic Federation. An HMO-covered feeling circle. Picture a beige waiting room, old magazines, broken coffee machine. Rick slumped in a chair, portal gun confiscated at the front desk. Across from him, Evil Morty, Rick Prime, and a version of Rick in the same outfit, but his name tag literally says, "Hi, I'm self-hatred and alcoholism." That's not a metaphor, that's just Tuesday for this guy. The therapist walks out like, "Okay, who wants to start?" And Evil Morty immediately launches into his mock intro. He's like, "Yeah, hi, I'm here because I grew up in a system designed by Ricks to keep them on top, and they use me as a meat shield and a battery. I'm not mad, I just don't want to live inside Rick's narrative prison anymore." That's not just daddy issues, that's multiversal OSHA violations. Rick Prime's next, leaning back like a guy who got arrested for tax fraud and thinks it's quirky. "Yeah, I blew up a Diane and a Beth. People keep saying you traumatized him. I call it character development. You're welcome for the origin story. Murdering your own variant's family and calling it a growth opportunity is a hell of a red flag if you ask me." Then we get to the inner demon Rick. He doesn't even sit up, just stares at the carpet and mutters, "None of this matters. Multiverse is meaningless. Everyone leaves. Feelings are a chemical illusion. Can we just skip to the relapse?" You know it's bad when the most illegal thing in the room is the coping mechanism. And here's the twist. Even in this joke, the therapist would probably turn to regular Rick first. Not Evil Morty, not Rick Prime, not the walking bottle of self-loathing. Because real therapy, believe it or not, doesn't start with "let's arrest your villains." It starts with, Why do you keep choosing the same pain on purpose? You don't fix Rick by catching Rick Prime. You fix Rick by asking why. After the revenge, he still crawls back into the garage and drinks until the days blur. Just to give you an idea of how backwards this is, Evil Morty's like, I escaped your entire cosmic firewall, and the therapist goes, cool, we'll get to that, but Rick, why did you build a firewall that traps you in your own superiority complex? I don't know, I'm kind of here for it. Anyway, snap back to our case file. We set up a goofy therapy sketch and accidentally proved our own point. Even when we try to make it about the cool villains, Rick's biggest problem is still Rick, which should make you very suspicious about where this verdict is heading next. High-level threats. Why external villains keep losing the long game. So let's zoom out for a second, because if you just look at body counts and explosions, you'd swear Rick's enemies are winning. Galactic empires, evil variants, godlike parasites. It looks stacked against one drunk grandpa in a lab coat, right? Yeah, about that. Every big external villain in this show has the same basic life cycle. Show up, talk a big game, get obliterated, exit stage left. The Galactic Federation. Rick literally engineers a currency crash and collapses the entire government with one drunk science prank. The Council of Ricks. Blown to pieces in a coup. The Citadel. Hijacked by Evil Morty, turned into his personal fascist playground, and then shredded when he punches through the central finite curve. That's a hell of a resume of toppled regimes. Even Evil Morty, the fandom's favourite final boss, technically wins, and then pieces out. He doesn't hang around to torment Rick. He's not calling every few days like, hey Grandpa, just checking if you're still sad. His whole plan is about escaping the Rick-centric multiverse firewall, not about Rick C-137 personally. When he walks through that golden portal, he's leaving the show's main sentence, not extending it. Now compare that to the one enemy that never leaves, Rick's own brain. The Federation falls, the Council dies, the Citadel burns, and Rick still wakes up miserable. His depression, addiction, and self-sabotage don't get better after these victories. They usually spike. Remember after he destroys the Federation and frames Jerry so Beth will keep him around? He turns himself in, lands in a galactic prison, and gives that I'm a terrible father monologue. Legally, that's an escape artist flex. Emotionally, that's a guy begging the universe to lock him up because he can't stand himself. Same thing when he busts out of that prison. Huge sci-fi heist, multiple Ricks, massive body count. He wins, blows up the Council, dismantles the Federation again. You'd think that's a high-five, roll credits moment. Instead, the show hard cuts to Rick alone in the garage, ranting to Morty about being the smartest man in the universe and looking completely hollow. He beats the system and still loses the night. If you ask me, the structure of the show is basically screaming at you about this. Arcs with big enemies end. The Evil Morty saga gets a climax. Rick Prime's hunt is building to a finish. But episodes about Rick's emotional damage keep coming back like an illegal recurring charge on your credit card. Every season you get at least one Rick is deeply broken bottle episode. Believe it or not, the writers are kind of tipping their hand about where the real conflict lives. Just to give you an idea of how rigged this is, when an enemy disappears and Rick is still miserable, that enemy was never the core problem. If killing Rick Prime doesn't fix him, if Evil Morty escaping doesn't change his day-to-day self-loathing, can you really call them his greatest enemy? Or are they just very loud side quests in a war he's mainly fighting with himself? Buckle up, because once we stack those external threats directly against the internal ones, the greatest enemy leaderboard is going to look way different than you probably expect. Verdict. Rick's greatest enemy revealed, and it was in the garage all along. So once you stack everything side by side and actually run the numbers, the verdict's kind of brutal. Rick's greatest enemy is Rick, not Evil Morty. Not Rick Prime, not the Citadel. It's the self-destructive, weaponized brain living rent-free inside his own skull. Think about Evil Morty for a second. Huge ideological enemy, right? He literally tears open the central finite curve, walks out of Rick's curated I'm always the smartest guy sandbox, and pieces into a universe where Ricks don't run the show. That's a hell of a move. But after he escapes, he's not in Rick's garage, he's not in Rick's bed at 3 a.m. He's not the reason Rick is staring at a bottle instead of talking to his family. Evil Morty breaks the system, but he doesn't haunt Rick's actual day-to-day misery. Rick Prime gets closer. This guy murders Diane and their Beth, nukes Rick, C-137's entire life, and basically speedruns him into the depressed alcoholic we know. You'd think that kind of origin crime earns permanent greatest enemy status. But when Rick Prime finally dies, Rick doesn't heal. He doesn't suddenly stop being cruel, or sober up, or forgive himself. He just keeps spiraling. The external boss fight ends. The internal war doesn't even slow down. Same with the institutions, the Council of Ricks, the Citadel, all that Rick-on-Rick bureaucracy. They rise, they fall, they elect a Morty president, they get annihilated. Galactic empires topple, fascist Ricks get smoked, and your guy is still back in the garage, drunk, yelling at a talking cat or trying to speedrun a suicide attempt between adventures. Governments change. Rick's baseline misery just renews its lease every season. Because the real enemy is the pattern. The suicide attempts we've seen. The casual I'm a god swagger hiding a guy who literally turned himself into a pickle rather than go to therapy. The alcoholism that's so constant it's basically a supporting character. The way he takes every potential safe harbour, Beth's house, Birdperson's friendship, even Morty's loyalty, and turns it into another battlefield. If you ask me, that's not just trauma, that's a full-time self-sabotage job. And here's the darkest part. The central finite curve is basically Rick building his own cage. He designs a multiverse where no one can rival him intellectually, which sounds cool until you realise what that means. If no one out there can beat you, the only thing left that can actually challenge you is your own mind. Believe it or not, by making himself the smartest man in every relevant universe, Rick accidentally speedruns to a final boss he can't out-invent, his need to self-destruct. It's a bleaker answer than Evil Morty is the big bad, sure, but it fits the show. Beneath the fart jokes and illegal space crimes, this is a series about a brilliant man losing over and over to his own brain chemistry. Every time the portal gun turns off, that's who he's locked in with. And if Rick's greatest enemy really is himself, what does that say about every version of Rick still out there, doing the same thing? Buckle up, because once you follow that logic into the rest of the multiverse, the collateral damage gets a lot worse than one sad guy in a garage. Reflection. What Rick's greatest enemy says about the show and us. Once you see Rick's greatest enemy as Rick, the whole show kind of flips. Suddenly all those big external bad guys, Evil Morty, Rick Prime, the Council, random space fascists, they stop looking like final bosses and start looking like really elaborate mood boards for one dude's depression. Every crazy set piece is basically his brain chemistry doing cosplay. Take Evil Morty. On paper, he's this genius mastermind tearing down the central finite curve, blowing up the Rick-centric multiverse like it's an outdated operating system. Cool, scary, big villain energy. But if you ask me, what he's really attacking is Rick's entire belief system. I'm the smartest, I'm untouchable, the universe is my playground. Evil Morty just walks in and goes, yeah, that ideology is a crime actually, and hits uninstall. It's not just a power struggle, it's Rick's worldview on trial. Same with Rick Prime. That guy's absolutely a monster. He murders Diane and their Beth, he bounces, and he basically forges C-137 Rick in Trauma and Revenge. But once you know that, every later episode where Rick drinks himself into a coma or sabotages a relationship stops being, wow, wild sci-fi hijinks, and starts reading like evidence exhibits. Rick Prime fired the first shot, but Rick is the one who keeps reloading the gun and pointing it at himself. And the show knows this. That's why anytime Rick technically wins, the writers yank the football away. He beats the Federation and immediately spirals into a suicidal drinking binge. He outsmarts the president and ends up lonely, petty, and begging Morty to keep hanging out. He can fix time, bodies, even entire timelines. But the one crime he can't beat is whatever's going on inside his own skull. It's tragic. It's darkly funny. It's also, annoyingly, kind of relatable. Because that's why you still root for him, right? You watch Rick do absolutely illegal, unforgivable stuff, rack up a cosmic prison sentence that makes forever look short, and for some reason you still lean in when he almost does the right thing. You know what it's like to fight your worst impulses, lose, swear you'll do better, and then not. Rick is just that feeling with a portal gun and drinking problem. And hey, faux philosophy time. If the smartest man in the universe can't outsmart his own self-destruction, What does that say about how hard it is for any of us to change? If a guy who can literally rewrite reality can't get through one family dinner without emotionally detonating, what chance do you or I have on a Tuesday? Anyway, I don't know, I'm kind of here for it. Because once you start putting Rick on the stand like this, it's a hell of a temptation to do it to everyone. Today we ranked his enemies, tomorrow we could be calculating Morty's accomplice charges, Beth's negligence rap sheet, or the President's intergalactic war crimes. So buckle up, because this format works a little too well on the rest of the Smith family. Outro. Your turn in the Court of Ricks, CTA and Next cases. So buckle up, because this format works a little too well on the rest of the Smith family. But before we start sentencing the entire bloodline, let's close the file on this case. Today we basically ran a full multiversal trial. We laughed off low-level clowns like Jerry and the Galactic Federation. We walked through the bureaucratic nightmare of the Council and the Citadel. We weighed the ideological nuke that is Evil Morty. We followed the blood trail back to Rick Prime, and we still landed on the same verdict. Rick's greatest enemy is Rick. That's kind of the messed up magic trick of this show, right? On paper, Evil Morty is terrifying. He doesn't just want to kill a Rick, he wants to delete the entire Rick-centric operating system. Rick Prime literally murdered Diane and Beth and rewrote C-137's whole life into a revenge speedrun. The Council tried to cage him inside a fascist Rick DMV. By any normal standard, those guys are a hell of a rogues gallery, but then you watch Rick alone in the garage. No portal gun, no crowd. Just a guy who can build god-killing weapons and still can't legally operate his own emotions. The Federation can't make him drink. Evil Morty can't make him push people away. Rick Prime didn't force him to Cronenberg an entire planet and then bail. That stuff is all coming from inside the house. So what do you think? Did we get the verdict right? Or are you planting your flag on Team Evil Morty or Team Rick Prime? Is the greatest enemy the one who hurts Rick's body, his ideology, his family, or the one who's in his head every single day racking up an infinite emotional prison sentence? Drop your ruling in the comments, because this is one of those questions where the jury is definitely still out. And don't just say it's Rick without backing it up. Who's your pick, and what's the specific episode, line, or crime that sold you? Is it Evil Morty walking through the Citadel massacre like a Bond villain, Rick Prime whistling after bombing Diane, or Rick trying to unalive himself in the garage and failing because the machine cares more about him than he does? I don't know, I'm kind of here for the chaos in that comment section. If you want more cases like this, we've got options. We can open a fresh file on who is Morty's greatest enemy. Is it Rick, the universe, or Morty's own need for validation? We can ask, is Evil Morty actually a villain or just the only guy willing to call the central finite curve illegal? Or go full crossover and figure out which cartoon character would get the longest prison sentence in the multiverse? Believe it or not, Rick might have competition. Anyway, if you had fun playing Multiversal Jury today, subscribing is basically like joining the Council of Viewers. You get a vote on every future verdict. Liking the video is you stamping guilty on the case file, and when you drop character suggestions in the comments, you're officially filing a new complaint with our interdimensional court clerk. Because at the end of the day, no matter how many gods, governments, or evil versions of himself Rick beats, he still has to wake up as Rick tomorrow. Same brain, same pain, same illegal amount of trauma. Or, in his own words, what? So everyone's supposed to sleep every single night now? You realize that nighttime makes up half of all time. Good night, Rick. Enjoy the other half.